You know, life's funny that way, no matter who you are. Rich, poor, famous, or just another face in the crowd, you'll have to walk through the dark at some point. Everyone does. Even him, David Beckham, the golden boy, the icon, the man the whole world adored. But there was a time, not that long ago, when England's darling became England's enemy. Isolated, hated, threatened, the same man who made millions cheer was suddenly the one they wanted to destroy. He was mocked in the papers, booed in the stadiums, and feared stepping outside his own front door. And yet, he endured. In today's story, we're going to step back into that darkness, to see how a single red card turned a hero into a villain, and how that same man fought his way back to become one of the most respected footballers in history. This is the story of David Beckham, the man who fell, burned, and rose again.
Chapter 1. The Kick. It was a warm night in Saint Etienne, June 1998. The kind of summer air that clings to your shirt and makes the floodlights hum a little louder than usual. England were playing Argentina in the World Cup. The world was watching. The nation was holding its breath. And somewhere on that pitch, just a few yards from the halfway line, a young man was about to change everything with one foolish flick of his leg. David Beckham, 23. Golden hair, slicked back, face calm but burning inside, had always been the boy who wanted to make England proud. The one who practiced free kicks until dusk, who dreamt of wearing the 3 lions not just as a shirt, but as a promise. That night, he thought it was another chance to make good on that promise. But football doesn't care for promises, not when pride gets in the way. Simeone, the Argentine captain, had been on him all game. A nudge here, a whisper there. Words you couldn't hear but could feel. The sort that dig under your skin. Beckham had been kicked, pulled, mocked. And when Simeone clattered him from behind and leaned in, smiling, saying something only the devil himself would enjoy, Beckham, lying flat on the grass, let his leg swing back. Just a tap, barely a kick. But in football, and in life, the smallest movements can trigger the largest storms. The referee saw it. The red card flashed under the French floodlights like a blade of light. Beckham didn't argue. He just stood there, frozen, jaw tight, eyes wide, not in anger, but disbelief. He walked off the pitch with the quiet shuffle of a man who already knew what was coming. England would play on without him. 10 lions left. 1 boy gone. In the pubs back home, in the living rooms and clubs of Manchester, London, and Birmingham, people slammed their pints, cursed the telly, shouted his name in fury. Bloody Beckham, what's he done? Some cried. Some laughed bitterly. By the time Argentina knocked England out on penalties, the story had already written itself. Beckham had ruined it. And in that cruel English way, half love, half rage, the country turned. Back in the tunnel, Beckham sat alone, head in hands. The air smelled of grass and sweat and something else, the quiet after humiliation. No one said much. Shearer gave a nod, Southgate a pat on the shoulder. But everyone knew. You could feel it, the weight of disappointment, thick as fog. When he got to the dressing room, the noise from outside was still going, the roar of celebration, the whistles, the chaos. Inside, silence. Only the sound of tape being ripped from shins, boots clattering into bags. He looked down at the badge on his shirt, the red 3 lions, still damp with sweat, and thought, that's it. I've let them down. He didn't cry. Beckham rarely did. But he felt something worse. Emptiness. When the team flew back to England, the air inside the plane was stale. No one wanted to talk. Not about the game, not about him. He sat by the window, staring out at the clouds. They moved like ghosts, slow, pale, distant. He wondered how long it would take before the noise back home died down. It didn't. When he landed, the first thing he saw were cameras. Dozens, hundreds maybe. Flashbulbs popping like gunfire. A man shouted his name. David. Do you regret it? Another. What have you got to say to the fans? He said nothing. just walked through. Inside, he could feel his pulse rising, his chest tight. He wasn't angry, he was scared. Not of what he'd done, but of what people would do with it. Within a day, the newspapers had their front pages ready. 10 heroes, 1 fool. The man who let England down. And the most cruel of them all, the Daily Mirror's headline, printed with his face on a dartboard. Targets painted across his features. Letters poured in. Thousands. Some said they'd never forgive him. Some said worse. In pubs, people hung effigies of him, mannequins in England shirts, swinging from nooses. They burnt his name in chants. They called him a disgrace. A boy too soft for war, too vain for honor. And all the while, Beckham tried to live a normal life. At home, Victoria tried to keep things light. She'd say, "Ignore them, love. It'll blow over." But every morning, he'd open the paper, and there it was again, his face torn apart, mocked, vilified. One night, they were driving through London when someone hurled a can at the car. It bounced off the window, leaving a dent. Victoria gasped. Beckham just stared ahead, gripping the wheel tight. He didn't say a word, but his knuckles were white. He started to avoid going out, even walking into training at Carrington. He could feel the stares, the laughter. It wasn't his teammates, most of them stood by him. It was everyone else. The press, the fans, the security guards who wouldn't meet his eye. Everywhere he went, he heard it. Idiot. Traitor. Soft lad. The season began again soon after. Manchester United, 1,998.99. Beckham walked onto the pitch for the first home match, and the boos rained down. He'd expected them, but not like this. It wasn't a few shouts. It was a wall of sound, venomous, echoing through Old Trafford, like a storm trapped in steel. He didn't flinch. He couldn't. Ferguson had told him before the game, "You've got 2 options, lad. Hide or fight." Beckham chose to fight. He ran harder, tackled sharper, crossed deeper. But still, every time he touched the ball, the jeers came back. He'd go home after training, collapse on the sofa, and stare at the ceiling. Sometimes he'd close his eyes and see it again, the red card, the crowd, Simeone smirking. It replayed like a punishment he couldn't escape. Nights became the hardest. He'd wake up around 3 or 4, sweat clinging to his neck, mind racing. He'd walk around the house, checking the locks, pacing the hall. Sometimes he'd just sit by the window, staring out at the street. Even the silence felt like judgment. The tabloids said he was cracking under pressure. The radio said he was finished. The fans said he deserved it. And yet, deep down, somewhere beneath the guilt, he still believed. He believed he could turn it around if he just kept playing, if he just kept showing up. But belief alone isn't easy when the world decides it hates you. There's something very British about the way we destroy our heroes. We lift them up, polish them, celebrate them, then tear them apart the moment they fall short. And Beckham, whether he liked it or not, had become the latest sacrifice. He wasn't the villain they said he was. He was just young, proud, and human. But the country didn't want human. It wanted a saint. And saints don't get sent off. Weeks passed. The noise didn't fade. One morning, he found a note slipped under the door. No address, no name, just 3 words scrawled in black ink. "We'll get you." He laughed it off in front of Victoria, said it was just some idiot. But when she went to bed, he sat at the kitchen table, staring at it. It wasn't the words that scared him. It was the thought that someone, somewhere, hated him enough to write them. He started training earlier, showing up before the rest of the squad, staying late, running until his legs went numb. It was his only escape. On the pitch, the noise faded. For 90 minutes, it was just him and the ball, the one thing that never judged, never lied. And that's how it began, not the fall, but the fight. Because in the end, that kick didn't just change the game. It changed Beckham. It stripped away everything that was pretty and easy about his life and left him with the raw truth. The world will love you, then hate you, then dare you to earn their love again. He wasn't ready for forgiveness yet, but he was ready to work for it. And under those gray Manchester skies, as the rain began to fall on the Carrington pitch, you could see him there, boots soaked, shirt clinging, face cold and focused. Every cross, every sprint, every tackle whispered one thing to the world that had turned on him. You can hate me all you like. I'm not done yet. Chapter 2. The Hate Storm. They say England forgives, but not that summer. The whistle had blown in Saint Etienne. 90 minutes of sweat, passion, and pride, and then it all slipped away in one small, foolish kick. A flick of frustration, a heartbeat of anger. When Beckham lay on the grass, staring into the French night sky, he didn't yet know that life as he knew it had ended. Back home, in the pubs and the terraces, people were already sharpening their words like knives. It wasn't just disappointment. It was rage. Pure, bitter rage. In England, football isn't just a game. It's a religion. And when the high priest of that faith lets you down, the faithful demand blood. The newspapers came first, front pages screaming, 10 heroes, 1 stupid boy. A single photograph, Beckham lying on the pitch, head turned, eyes shut, splashed across every stand in the country. Overnight, he became the villain. Kids in playgrounds were told not to wear his shirt. His number 7, once sacred at Old Trafford, suddenly carried shame. He came home to Manchester expecting quiet. What he found was venom. Letters pushed through his door, hundreds of them. Some filled with insults, some with threats, some with things so vile he couldn't bring himself to show Victoria. There was one with a bullet inside a single round of metal and a note. You deserve this. He laughed at first, a short, dry laugh, more disbelief than humor. But the fear crept in later, at night, when the house was still and the city outside hummed with distant anger. In training, he could feel it too. Not from his teammates, the lads at United stood by him, but from the stairs over the fences, the voices shouting from the car parks. Beckham, you wanker, traitor, go back to Madrid. He'd smile, wave it off, pretend it didn't hurt. But when he got home, the mask fell away. Victoria would find him sitting in the dark sometimes, TV flickering but sound off. He'd stare through the screen, jaw tight, lost somewhere else. Dave? She'd whisper. He'd blink, smile weakly, and say, yeah, I'm fine. He wasn't. The worst part wasn't the hatred, it was the isolation. It wasn't just fans, it was the country. Taxi drivers, shopkeepers, even neighbors who once asked for autographs now turned away. One afternoon, he went to buy a newspaper. The man behind the counter refused to take his money. We don't serve traitors, he said. Beckham put the paper down and walked out. He didn't even argue. Later, in the car, he slammed the steering wheel until his hands shook. It's only football, he thought. It's supposed to be only football, but it wasn't. Not in England. Not for him. That season at United was brutal. Every away game felt like a trial. Every corner kick came with a chorus of hate. Bottles, coins, spit, he'd seen it all. The chants cut deeper than any tackle. Beckham's a wanker, hang the bastard. Once, someone threw a dart at him. Another time, a small firecracker landed near his boots. Security doubled, but the noise never stopped. Ferguson pulled him aside one evening. Keep your head down, son, the gaffer said. Don't give them the satisfaction. Beckham nodded, eyes lowered. But inside, he was cracking. At home, he tried to be strong for Victoria, for his parents, for the team. But the truth was, he was scared. Every time he left the house, he looked over his shoulder. Every time he walked into Old Trafford, he felt eyes burning holes in his back. He used to love football. The sound of the crowd, the smell of the grass, the rush before a free kick. Now it all felt poisoned. He'd lie awake, thinking of that moment, the kick, the fall, Simeone's face. If only he'd stayed down. If only the referee hadn't seen. If only. But regret's a cruel friend. It visits you at night, whispers your mistakes again and again until you believe you deserve every bit of pain. There was one game, Against West Ham, every touch, every pass, they booed. His parents were in the stands. He could see his mum trying not to cry. When he scored, finally, it was like silence, not celebration, just shock. He didn't even celebrate. He just looked around, breathing hard, almost daring them to hate him more. And they did. The tabloids twisted it. Arrogant Beckham refuses to celebrate. He couldn't win. Not on the pitch, not off it. The months dragged on. The World Cup felt like a wound that wouldn't heal. Christmas came and went. United kept winning. And still, the crowd booed. He stopped reading the papers, stopped watching the news. But there was one thing: he couldn't stop the letters. Every week, more arrived. Threats, insults, even some pretending to forgive, only to turn cruel halfway through. Victoria would collect them in a drawer, out of sight. "Let's not give them space in our home," she'd say. But words have a way of finding you, even when hidden. Then came the turning point. United were playing Inter in the Champions League. The world was watching. Beckham stepped up for a free kick 30 yards out, left of center. For a heartbeat, the stadium went still. Then that familiar swing, that impossible curve, and the ball found the top corner like it was destined. The crowd erupted. Even the haters couldn't help themselves. For the first time in months, he felt something shift, a crack in the wall of hate. Maybe, just maybe, football could save him after all. But redemption isn't a straight line. It's a road of nails. The hate didn't vanish overnight. The papers still mocked. The chants still came. But inside, he'd changed. He stopped hiding, stopped apologizing. He let his boots speak. Goal after goal, cross after cross. He became unstoppable, driven not by fame, but by fury, by a need to prove them wrong. And slowly, the tide began to turn. Still, at night, the darkness lingered. He'd sit by the window, staring out at the streetlights. Sometimes, Victoria would come sit beside him, silent. He'd turn to her and whisper, "You think they'll ever forgive me?" She'd smile softly. "One day, Dave. But you don't need their forgiveness. You just need your own." He didn't answer, because deep down, he wasn't sure he could ever forgive himself. "They hated me," he would write later, "but I had to keep playing. Football was the only place I still felt like me." And so he did, through the hate, through the fear, through the endless noise he played. Because that's what Beckham did best. He endured.
Chapter 3. The Breaking Point. Gyeoi Hanchu Jung. You can only take so much before the cracks start to show. By the time the year turned, the storm hadn't passed. It had simply changed its shape. The crowd's anger had dulled, but something colder took its place. A silence that followed him everywhere, the kind that filled the gaps between cheers. Beckham was still playing, still crossing, still delivering. But inside, he was coming apart. Training had become mechanical, a blur of drills, sprints, and forced smiles. He'd arrive early, headphones in, eyes low. No more jokes with the lads, no more banter, just sweat and silence. Ferguson watched him closely. The gaffer could always tell when something wasn't right, even if Beckham didn't say it. There was tension now, not open, not shouted, but tight, like a string pulled too far. Alex Ferguson had built Manchester United on discipline, and Beckham's growing fame was starting to unsettle that balance. The photo shoots, the endorsements, the haircuts, the world loved it. Ferguson didn't. To the manager, every minute Beckham spent with cameras was a minute stolen from football. To Beckham, football was everything. But he couldn't stop the world from looking. It started small, comments in training, a glare here, a raised voice there. Then came the explosion. United had lost an FA Cup tie they should have won. Beckham hadn't been at his best, distracted maybe, frustrated definitely. In the dressing room afterward, Ferguson's voice cut through the air like a blade. "You're not focused, David. You think you're a bloody celebrity now, don't you?" Beckham stood there, eyes down, jaw clenched. He didn't answer. "Look at me when I'm talking to you." When he did, it was like two storms colliding, youth and pride against authority and control. Later, people would talk about that moment, about boots and blood and headlines, but what they never saw was what came before. The silence, the pressure, the slow cracking of a young man who'd been carrying too much for too long. After that day, something broke between them. Ferguson still picked him, because talent demanded it, but the warmth was gone. The trust, the easy laughter, the fatherly arm around the shoulder, gone. At home, Victoria could see the toll it was taking. She'd catch him staring out the window again, his tea going cold, phone in his hand, but not ringing anyone. "Talk to him," she'd say. "Don't let it eat you up." But Beckham just shook his head. He's already made up his mind. What he didn't say, what he couldn't say, was that Ferguson was the closest thing he'd ever had to a second father, and losing that felt like losing home. Then came the tabloids again. "Beckham rift with Ferguson? Posh and Beck's too big for United." Every headline was another wound. The world wasn't satisfied with seeing him stumble. They wanted to see him fall. Every photo with Victoria became distraction. Every appearance, ego, every goal, redemption, always with a question mark. He couldn't win. There was one night he'd never forget. It was past midnight, the city asleep. He was sitting on the edge of the bed, head in his hands, the glow of the streetlight cutting across the room. Victoria stirred awake. "Dave, come to bed." He shook his head. "Can't sleep." She reached for his hand. "It's just football." He let out a low, bitter laugh. "That's the thing, Vic. It's never just football anymore." Silence. Then, softly, "Do you still love it?" He looked up at her, eyes tired. "I don't know." And that was the truth. The boy who used to sleep with a football under his arm now feared the thing he loved most. The weight followed him everywhere. The dressing room, once a sanctuary, now felt colder. Teammates still respected him, still passed him the ball, but he could feel the shift. He wasn't one of the lads anymore. He was Beckham. At training, whispers floated, sponsorships, magazine shoots, distractions. Even if they didn't mean harm, it chipped away at him. So he trained harder, longer, stayed after everyone left, practicing free kicks under the dim floodlights until his legs gave out. Because if he couldn't silence the noise, he'd drown it out with effort. Then, one morning, Ferguson called him into the office. "Madrid are asking questions," he said. Beckham froze. Madrid. He dreamed of the Bernabeu once, the white shirts, the history, but not like this. Not as an escape. "I'm not leaving, boss," he said quietly. Ferguson just nodded. "We'll see." The season rolled on like a storm that refused to end. Beckham scored, assisted, delivered. But every high came with a sting. The crowd cheered, but it wasn't love. It was necessity. When United won the league again, Beckham smiled for the cameras, lifted the trophy, and went home feeling empty. He stood in front of the mirror that night, medal still around his neck, and whispered to his reflection, "What does it even mean now?" The breaking point didn't come in a single moment. It was the accumulation, the fatigue, the doubt, the loss of trust, the endless scrutiny. One day he woke up and realized he wasn't afraid of the hate anymore. He was just tired of it. He'd spent years trying to win everyone back, the fans, the press, even Ferguson. And for what? The harder he tried, the less they saw him. To them, he was a story, not a person. When the call finally came, the one confirming Madrid's offer, he didn't feel anger or excitement. Just peace. Maybe this was the way it had to be. Maybe England had taken all it could from him. He went for a drive that night, no destination, just the hum of the engine and the blur of city lights. Rain hit the windscreen like static. The radio played quietly. some old Britpop song he didn't even like. And he thought about the boy who once stood on a muddy pitch in Leytonstone, dreaming of playing for Manchester United. That boy had done it all. But now, maybe it was time to let him rest. At home, Victoria found him sitting on the floor, back against the wall, eyes distant. "You're thinking about leaving," she said. He didn't answer, just nodded slightly. "You'll be happier," she whispered. "Spain will be different." He smiled faintly. "I hope so." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "You deserve peace, Dave." He wasn't sure he believed her, but he wanted to. Before the season ended, he had one last moment at Old Trafford. A free kick, 25 yards out, final minutes, the familiar hush before the storm. He breathed in, let the noise fade, and struck. The ball curled, kissed the top corner, and the crowd erupted. For a moment, just a moment, everything felt right again. No hate, no noise, no headlines. Just him and the ball, exactly like it was meant to be. He turned away, hands in the air, not to celebrate, but to say goodbye. "That was the moment I knew it was over," he'd later say, not in anger, just in acceptance. Leaving United wasn't betrayal, it was survival. He wasn't walking away from the club, he was walking away from the weight that had nearly crushed him. In the weeks that followed, as boxes were packed and headlines spun new tales, Beckham felt something strange, calm. He'd weathered the hate, faced the fury, stood under the heaviest spotlight in the world, and still, somehow, remained standing. The boy from Leytonstone had finally reached his breaking point, and instead of shattering, he had chosen to walk through it. "Sometimes," he wrote later, "you have to lose everything to find yourself again." And as the plane lifted off the tarmac, carrying him toward Madrid's blinding sun, the clouds over England seemed to part, if only for a moment. He looked out the window, down at the land that had loved and cursed him in equal measure, and whispered to himself, almost like a prayer, "Thank you, and goodbye." Chapter 4. The Redemption, Suchuok Loi. Sometimes redemption isn't loud. Sometimes it's just the quiet act of showing up again. The move to Madrid wasn't a fairy tale beginning. It wasn't champagne and confetti or some grand triumphant escape. It was exhaustion wrapped in sunlight, a man trying to breathe again. When David arrived in Spain, he carried more than just luggage. He carried the ghosts of England, the headlines, the noise, the unspoken questions about whether he still had anything left to give. The Spanish press called him El Galactico. The fans called him Bex. But inside, he felt like neither. He was just David, the boy from Leytonstone, once again trying to prove himself. Madrid was chaos in a different language. The sun was too bright, the cameras never far. Everywhere he went, there were people, shouting his name, waving shirts, holding cameras above their heads. He smiled, waved, signed the autographs. But when the hotel door closed behind him each night, the silence was heavy. He'd stare out at the city lights from his balcony, the hum of Madrid beneath him, and whisper, "Let this be the place where I start again." The first few weeks were hard, different culture, different rhythm, different expectations. The Spanish players, Zidane, Figo, Ronaldo, Roberto Carlos, all legends in their own right. They weren't cruel, just distant. They'd seen stars come and go. Beckham was the English boy with the pretty face and the press entourage. Another brand, another name. He knew that. So he didn't talk much. He worked. Training sessions under the relentless Madrid sun became his penance. He ran harder than anyone. Stayed later. After everyone left, he'd keep striking free kicks one after another until the groundskeeper turned off the lights. The first goal came sooner than anyone expected. A curling free kick, that familiar whip, the net rippling like an old friend remembering his name. The Bernabeu roared. And for the first time in what felt like forever, so did he. He wasn't just playing for Madrid. He was rebuilding himself. Each pass, each assist, each tackle, they weren't just moments in a match. They were small pieces of himself being glued back together. The hate he'd left behind in England slowly faded into background noise, and in its place came something gentler, not adoration, but respect. Even the Spanish papers began to soften. El Inglés Trabajador. The hard-working Englishman. He'd earned that, not through words, through sweat. Victoria and the kids visited often. Brooklyn would run across the training pitch after sessions, his laughter cutting through the Madrid heat. David would pick him up, spin him around, and for those few seconds, everything felt simple again. He'd forgotten what that felt like, joy without weight. One evening, after training, he sat with Zidane in the empty stands, both sipping water, watching the sun sink behind the goalposts. Zidane turned to him and said, "You play with your heart, Beckham." "That's rare." David smiled faintly. "Sometimes it gets me in trouble." Zidane chuckled. "That's the only way it's worth it." It was a small exchange, but one he'd remember for years, a quiet validation from a man he admired. Back in England, something strange was happening. The same papers that once tore him apart were now printing words like resurgence. Old critics started calling him mature. When he wore the England shirt again, the boos were gone. Wembley, for once, felt like home again. He stood there during the anthem, eyes closed, hand over heart, and instead of bitterness, he felt gratitude. The crowd wasn't the same, but maybe he wasn't either. There was a night, one of those nights that change everything. Spain versus England, international friendly. The match was tense, and Beckham, now captain, played like a man reborn, disciplined, calm, sharp. In the final minutes, a free kick, 22 yards out. He stood over the ball, crowd buzzing. The run-up was slow, measured. The strike, perfect. The ball arced, dipped, and kissed the top corner. Silence. Then a roar that shook the stadium. Even the Spanish fans stood and clapped. It wasn't just a goal. It was a closing of a circle. But redemption isn't just about football. It's about forgiveness. Of others and of yourself. One afternoon, in a quiet cafe in Madrid, Ferguson walked in. He'd come for UEFA duties, but he'd called ahead. Wanted to see him. David was nervous, like a kid again. They sat across from each other, tea between them. For a long time, neither spoke. Then Ferguson said, "You've done well, lad." David smiled softly. "Took me long enough." The old man nodded. "Sometimes it has to." No apologies, no explanations. Just two men who'd been through hell together, finally finding peace in silence. When Ferguson stood to leave, he put a hand on Beckham's shoulder. "I'm proud of you." And that was it. The chapter that had haunted him for years quietly closed with those words. Life in Madrid wasn't perfect. There were still bad games, still criticism, still pressure. But something inside him had changed. He no longer needed to prove anything to anyone. Not to the fans, not to the papers, not even to Ferguson. All he wanted now was to play. For himself, for his family, for the love that started it all. There's a moment, deep in the second season, when he's walking through the Bernabeu tunnel before kickoff. He touches the crest on his shirt, Real Madrid, and feels the same nervous excitement he did as a kid, walking out at Old Trafford. He realizes then that redemption doesn't erase the past. It just helps you carry it better. Years later, when he'd look back, this is what he'd say. People remember the fame, the money, the red cards, the goals. But what I remember most is the fight to get up each morning and keep going. That's what defines you. Not how far you fall, but how you stand back up when no one's watching. As the camera fades on Madrid's skyline, Beckham walks out of the stadium tunnel into the setting sun. The crowd chants his name, but his smile isn't about them anymore. It's quiet, private, earned. The redemption wasn't in the trophies or the applause. It was in the stillness that followed, the peace of a man who had finally forgiven himself. In football, you can lose games, titles, even your reputation. But if you never lose yourself, you can always find your way back. And with that, Beckham, once the most hated man in England, became something far greater, a man who'd fallen from grace and found it again, not through perfection, but through resilience. Chapter 5. The Reflection. When the cheers fade, you finally hear yourself. Years had rolled by. The hair changed, the shirts changed, even the boots. But one thing stayed: the way he still laced them up each morning with the same small breath of reverence, like a quiet thank you. Beckham was older now. The edges had softened. The fame no longer felt like a wave to fight, more like a tide that came and went while he watched from the shore. He'd moved from Madrid to LA, then to Milan, then Paris, always chasing one last challenge, one more field under different skies. And everywhere he went, people still called his name. But what they didn't see were the moments between the matches, the silence after the shower, the way he sat with a towel over his head, listening to his own heart steady again. At home, life was quieter. Victoria laughing in the kitchen, the kids running round the garden, Brooklyn taller now, Romeo and Cruz kicking a ball the way he once did in Leytonstone. He'd stand at the window some evenings and think, so this is what it was all for. It wasn't the trophies. It was the balance, the slow, patient peace that had taken half a lifetime to learn. He often spoke to young players now, told them the things no one had told him, that the real game isn't out there on the pitch, it's in your head, in your chest, in the way you handle being doubted and adored in the same breath. You can't control the noise, he'd say. You can only control how you walk through it. And when they asked about 1998, that red card, that fall from grace, he never flinched. He'd smile, half sad, half grateful. That was the moment I grew up, he'd tell them. Without that, I'd still be the boy who thought love from the crowd was everything. There's a clip, one the cameras caught years later, of him alone at Old Trafford before a charity match. No crowd, just gray clouds over the stands. He walks to the corner flag, places a ball, steps back. A single strike, that same whip, that same curve, and the net ripples. He laughs softly. Still got it, he mutters. But what the microphone barely picks up is what comes next, under his breath. Still me. The narrator's voice turns low. He learned that greatness isn't measured by how many remember your name, but by how you handle being forgotten. He learned that redemption isn't a headline, it's a habit. And he learned that forgiveness, of yourself, of others, is the hardest trophy to win. When he finally hung up the boots, there were no tears. Just applause, hugs, a slow walk off the pitch, and that little nod to the sky. The same boy who once faced a nation's hatred walked away to the sound of gratitude. He'd made peace with the game, and with the man it had turned him into. In the end, he'd write, I was never the best player in the world, but I was always the one who refused to stay down. And maybe that's what people saw in him all along, not perfection, but persistence. Because in a world that builds you up to tear you down, David Beckham never stopped showing up. As the credits roll, the camera pans across an empty pitch. Floodlights hum, grass glistens in the drizzle. Somewhere, faintly, a ball rolls to a stop, and a voice, calm, worn, unmistakably London, says, Everyone's got their dark days, mate. It's what you do after that makes you who you are. And that was David Beckham's darkest chapter. Not the fall of a superstar, but the rebirth of a man. If his story moved you, if it made you see the man behind the fame, then don't forget to hit subscribe and turn on the bell icon. There's so much more to uncover behind the legends we think we already know. Leave a comment below. What part of Beckham's journey hit you the hardest? Thank you for watching, mate. Stay humble, stay curious, and I'll see you in the next story. This is London Calling, signing off.